Have you ever been humiliated so deeply that it felt like your soul was being ripped apart in front of everyone you thought cared about you? Well, let me tell you about the day I was thrown out of a wedding like a piece of trash, only to discover that sometimes God has a way of turning your greatest humiliation into your most powerful moment of vindication. My name is Margaret Williams, and I'm 52 years old. I've lived through enough heartbreak and betrayal to fill several lifetimes, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened on that spring Saturday in 2023. It was supposed to be one of the happiest days of my life, watching the girl I'd raised like my own daughter walk down the aisle. Instead, it became the day that changed everything. You see, I'd spent 15 years of my life loving a man named Richard Thompson and raising his daughter Jessica as if she were my own flesh and blood. Richard was a wealthy white businessman who'd lost his first wife to cancer when Jessica was only 7 years old. I was 37 when we met, working as a nurse at the hospital where he'd brought Jessica for a broken arm. I was young, ambitious, and had dreams of my own, but love has a way of changing your entire life's trajectory, doesn't it? Richard was different from other men I'd dated. He didn't see my dark skin as something exotic or forbidden. He didn't treat me like I was lucky to be with a successful white man. He simply loved me for who I was, Margaret Williams, a strong, intelligent, caring woman who happened to have fallen head over heels for him and his broken little girl who needed a mother's love. But his family? That was an entirely different story. From the moment Richard introduced me as his girlfriend, they treated me like I was some kind of gold-digging intruder who had manipulated their precious Richard into a relationship. His mother, Eleanor Thompson, would smile sweetly to my face at family gatherings, then spend the entire evening making subtle comments about how certain people know how to take advantage of grieving widowers. His brother Marcus would ask me pointed questions about my background, my education, my family's financial status, as if he were conducting some kind of investigation to prove I wasn't worthy of their family name. And don't even get me started on Richard's sister Patricia. That woman made it her personal mission to remind me at every opportunity that I would never truly belong in their world. She'd make comments about how different my hair looked, how unusual my food choices were at family dinners, how strange it must be for Jessica to have someone so culturally different trying to be her mother. But you know what? I endured it all because I loved Richard, and I loved Jessica, and I believed that love would eventually conquer their prejudice and ignorance. Richard and I never officially married, though we lived as husband and wife for 15 years. He proposed multiple times, but somehow there was always some family crisis or business emergency that required postponing the wedding. I realize now that he was probably protecting me from his family's inevitable dramatic reaction to our marriage, but at the time, I just focused on building a life with him and raising Jessica. And oh, how I loved that little girl. When I met her, she was this tiny, broken 7-year-old who hadn't spoken more than a few words since her mother died. She was angry at the world, angry at God for taking her mama, and suspicious of any woman who tried to get close to her daddy. But I was patient. I was gentle. I was consistent. I showed up for her every single day, even when she screamed that she hated me, even when she told me I wasn't her real mother and never could be. I packed her lunches every morning, making sure to include little notes with encouraging words or funny drawings. I braided her hair before school, teaching her about taking pride in her appearance and her heritage. Yes, I made sure she understood and appreciated her African American stepmother's culture too. I helped her with homework, attended every parent-teacher conference, cheered at every soccer game and school play. When she had nightmares about her mother, I was the one who held her until she fell back asleep. When she got her first period at 12 and was terrified and embarrassed, I was the one who explained everything and took her shopping for everything she needed. I taught her how to apply makeup when she turned 16, how to parallel park when she got her driver's license, how to stand up for herself when boys at school were disrespectful. I was there when she cried over her first heartbreak, when she stressed about college applications, when she worried about leaving her father and me to go away to university. For 15 years, I was her mother in every way that mattered except legally. Richard's health started declining when he was 68. He'd always been a strong, vital man, but suddenly he was dealing with heart problems, diabetes, and the early stages of what would eventually be diagnosed as dementia. I became his primary caregiver, managing his medications, driving him to doctor's appointments, making sure he ate healthy meals and got enough exercise. I put my own nursing career on hold to take care of him full-time. His family, of course, had opinions about this too. They questioned every medical decision I made, demanded to speak directly to his doctors, and constantly implied that I was somehow taking advantage of Richard's declining mental state. Eleanor actually had the audacity to suggest that I was deliberately keeping Richard isolated from his family so I could manipulate him into changing his will in my favor. The truth was, Richard was still sharp as a tack when it came to his business and financial decisions. Yes, he sometimes forgot what he'd had for breakfast or repeated stories from his past, but his love for me never wavered, and his understanding of what I'd sacrificed for our family was crystal clear. He knew I'd given up my career, my dreams of traveling, my chance to have biological children of my own, all to take care of him and Jessica. And he was grateful for every single sacrifice I'd made. When Jessica graduated from law school and announced her engagement to Michael Patterson, a young attorney from another wealthy family, I was overjoyed. I'd watched her grow from that broken little girl into a confident, successful woman, and I felt like I'd played a part in that transformation. She asked me to help plan the wedding, and we spent months together choosing flowers, tasting cakes, looking at venues. It felt like the kind of mother-daughter bonding I'd always dreamed of. But as the wedding date approached, I started noticing subtle changes in Jessica's behavior. She became more distant, less likely to include me in conversations about wedding details. When I asked about my role in the ceremony, she gave vague answers about how they were still working out the details. When I offered to help with the bridal shower, she told me her aunts had already taken care of everything. Richard passed away just 2 months before the wedding. It was peaceful. He died in his sleep with me holding his hand, exactly as he'd always said he wanted. But his death unleashed something ugly in his family that I'd never seen before. Suddenly, they were questioning every decision I'd made during his final months. They demanded to see his medical records, his financial statements, every document that proved what kind of care he'd received. Eleanor actually accused me of hastening his death, because I'd honored his wishes not to be put on life support when his condition became terminal. She hired a lawyer to investigate whether there were grounds for some kind of wrongful death lawsuit against me. Can you imagine? After 15 years of loving this man and caring for him through every health crisis, his own mother was trying to paint me as some kind of murderer. The funeral was a nightmare. Richard had specifically requested that I speak at his service, and I'd prepared a beautiful eulogy about our life together and his love for Jessica. But when I stood up to speak, Marcus literally blocked my path to the podium and announced that only blood relatives would be speaking that day. I was forced to sit in the back of the church like some distant acquaintance while his family rewrote the story of our 15 years together, barely mentioning my existence. Jessica didn't stand up for me. She didn't say a word when her uncle humiliated me in front of a church full of people. She just sat there in the front row, avoiding my eyes, letting her father's family treat the woman who'd raised her like she was nothing. That should have been my warning about what was coming, but I guess I was still hoping that grief was making everyone act irrationally, and that once we got through the funeral, things would go back to normal. I was so naive. The wedding was scheduled for a beautiful Saturday in late spring. The venue was the Thompson family estate, the same place where Richard and I had spent countless holidays and family gatherings. I'd helped Jessica plan every detail of this day, from the color of the tablecloths to the song choices for the reception. I'd even helped her pick out her wedding dress, spending hours at bridal shops, crying happy tears when she found the perfect gown. I woke up that morning feeling a mixture of sadness and joy. Richard should have been there to walk his daughter down the aisle, but I knew he would have been so proud to see the woman Jessica had become. I put on my best dress, an elegant navy blue outfit that Jessica had specifically approved months earlier, and carefully did my hair and makeup. I wanted to look perfect for what I thought would be one of the most important days of our family's life. I arrived at the estate early, expecting to help with last-minute preparations like I always did for family events. But when I walked up to the front door, Jessica's cousin Amanda was standing there like some kind of security guard. "Margaret," she said, not even bothering to hide the distaste in her voice, "I don't think you should be here." I laughed, thinking she was making some kind of joke. "Don't be silly, Amanda. I'm here for Jessica's wedding. I helped plan this entire thing." "Things have changed," she said, crossing her arms over her chest. The family has discussed it, and we don't think it's appropriate for you to be here today. My heart started pounding, but I tried to stay calm. I'm sorry, I don't understand. What do you mean it's not appropriate? Jessica is my daughter. Richard was my partner for 15 years. Of course I'm going to be at her wedding. Jessica is not your daughter, Amanda snapped. You were never married to Uncle Richard, which means you have no legal relationship to this family whatsoever. And frankly, we're tired of pretending otherwise. Before I could even respond, Eleanor Thompson appeared behind Amanda, flanked by Marcus and Patricia. The entire Thompson clan had assembled to confront me, like I was some kind of threat that needed to be neutralized. Margaret, Eleanor said in that sickeningly sweet voice she'd used to insult me for 15 years, surely you understand that this is a family event. Jessica is starting a new chapter of her life, and it's time for all of us to move forward. Move forward? I could barely get the words out. Eleanor, I raised Jessica. I've been part of this family for 15 years. Richard would be horrified by what you're doing right now. Richard is gone, Marcus said coldly. And now it's time for you to accept reality. You were never really part of this family. You were Richard's companion. But Jessica is our blood, and this is her day. We won't have it overshadowed by awkwardness. I felt like I was drowning. These people who I'd served Christmas dinner to, who I'd bought birthday gifts for, who I'd welcomed into my home for countless family gatherings, were standing there telling me I had never belonged with them at all. Where is Jessica? I demanded. I want to hear this from her. Jessica is getting ready for her wedding, Patricia said. She doesn't need to be upset by this situation on her special day. We're handling it for her. She asked you to do this? I couldn't believe it. She asked you to kick me out of her wedding? The silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. Jessica hadn't asked them to do this, but she also hadn't told them not to do it. She was hiding in the bridal suite, letting her aunts and uncles handle the dirty work of rejecting the woman who'd raised her. You need to leave, Marcus said. Now. Before the other guests start arriving and this becomes even more embarrassing for everyone involved. Embarrassing? I felt something snap inside me. You think I'm an embarrassment? I sacrificed everything for this family. I gave up my career, my dreams, my chance to have my own children, all to take care of Richard and raise Jessica. And now you want to throw me away like garbage because it's convenient for you? You were well compensated for your services, Eleanor said dismissively. Richard was very generous to you over the years. But that doesn't give you the right to impose yourself on family events indefinitely. Services. She called 15 years of love and sacrifice my services, like I'd been some kind of hired help instead of a woman who devoted her life to this family. I want to see Jessica, I said firmly. I want to hear from her own mouth that she doesn't want me at her wedding. That's not going to happen, Patricia said. You're going to leave quietly, or we're going to call security to escort you off the property. Your choice. I looked around at these people I'd cooked for, cleaned for, cared for when they were sick, celebrated with during happy times. They were staring at me with a mixture of disgust and impatience, like I was some kind of pest that needed to be exterminated. Fine, I said quietly. I'll go. But Jessica will know what you did today. And she'll know that when she needed someone to stand up for what was right, her own family chose cruelty instead. Jessica will understand that we protected her from an uncomfortable situation, Marcus replied. Now please leave before this gets any more unpleasant. I walked back to my car on shaking legs, my vision blurred with tears of rage and heartbreak. As I was getting into my car, I saw other guests starting to arrive, people I'd known for years, people who would probably assume I simply wasn't invited to the wedding. They'd never know that I'd been humiliated and rejected on what should have been one of the happiest days of my life. But as I sat in my car, trying to decide whether to drive home and cry in private or stay and confront Jessica directly, I realized something that stopped me cold. I remembered a conversation I'd had with Richard just a few weeks before he died. He'd been unusually serious, talking about his will and his plans for taking care of Jessica and me after he was gone. Margaret, he'd said, holding my hand with those trembling fingers that the illness had made so fragile. "I've made sure that Jessica will be taken care of course. But I've also made sure that you'll never have to worry about money or security for the rest of your life. You've given me and Jessica everything, and I want to give you everything in return." I'd assumed he meant he'd left me some kind of modest inheritance, maybe enough to buy a small house or supplement my retirement. Richard's family had always made it clear that they expected the bulk of his estate to go to Jessica, and I'd never questioned that assumption. But now, sitting in my car outside the estate where I was being treated like an unwelcome intruder, I started wondering if there was more to Richard's final plans than anyone realized. I decided not to leave. Instead, I parked down the road where I couldn't be seen from the house, and I waited. I didn't know what I was waiting for exactly, maybe just the chance to see Jessica in her wedding dress, to get some kind of closure on 15 years of my life that were apparently being erased from family history. The ceremony was scheduled to start at 4 o'clock. By 3:30, I could see guests filing into the backyard where they'd set up rows of white chairs facing a beautiful flower-covered archway. It was exactly what Jessica had dreamed of when we'd planned this day together: elegant, romantic, perfect. I felt like I was watching my own funeral. At exactly 4 o'clock, I heard the music start. Even from my hiding spot down the road, I could hear the string quartet playing the processional march that Jessica and I had chosen together. I imagined her walking down that aisle in the dress we'd picked out, her face glowing with happiness, surrounded by family and friends who loved her. Family and friends, but not me. Never me. But then, something unexpected happened. The music stopped abruptly, mid-song. Even from where I was sitting, I could hear voices, agitated, confused voices. Something was happening. I couldn't help myself. I got out of my car and crept closer to the estate, staying hidden behind the line of trees that bordered the property. From there, I could see the wedding guests turning in their chairs, looking confused and concerned. Some people were standing up, trying to see what was causing the commotion. And then I heard a voice that made my blood run cold: Father Mackenzie, the priest who was supposed to officiate the ceremony. He was speaking in a loud, clear voice that carried across the entire gathering. "Ladies and gentlemen," he was saying, "before we proceed with this joyous ceremony, I have been asked to fulfill a final request from the bride's father, Richard Thompson. As some of you know, Mr. Thompson passed away 2 months ago, but he left very specific instructions about this wedding day." My heart started pounding so hard I thought it might explode. What was happening? Mr. Thompson asked me to read aloud a portion of his last will and testament at this moment in the ceremony, Father Mackenzie continued. He wanted to make sure that certain truths were acknowledged publicly before his daughter began her new life as a married woman. I could see guests shifting uncomfortably in their seats. This was definitely not part of the wedding ceremony that Jessica and I had planned together. "Richard Thompson's will states the following," the priest began, his voice carrying clearly across the suddenly silent crowd. "To my beloved daughter Jessica, I leave my love, my pride, and my trust that she will always remember the woman who raised her with more devotion and sacrifice than any biological mother could have provided. That woman is Margaret Williams, who gave up her own dreams to make our family whole." I felt my knees go weak. Richard had planned this. Somehow, even from the grave, he was fighting for me. "To my family," Father Mackenzie continued reading, "I leave the knowledge that Margaret Williams has been the heart and soul of our household for 15 years, and any attempt to exclude her from Jessica's wedding day would be a betrayal of everything I valued most in this life." I could see people in the audience turning to look at each other, confused and uncomfortable. Eleanor Thompson had stood up from her seat in the front row, her face flushed with anger and embarrassment. And to Margaret Williams, the priest's voice grew stronger, "I leave the bulk of my estate, including the family home, all investment accounts, and controlling interest in Thompson Industries, because she has earned every penny through her unwavering love and dedication to my daughter and me." The silence that followed was deafening. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I couldn't process what I just heard. Richard had left me everything. Not just a modest inheritance or a token of appreciation, everything. The house, the business, the money. All of it. But more than that, he'd arranged for this moment of public vindication. He'd known his family would try to exclude me from Jessica's wedding, and he'd made sure that everyone present would know exactly what he thought of that betrayal. The silence was broken by Eleanor Thompson's voice, shrill with panic and rage. "This is ridiculous. Father Mackenzie, surely you don't intend to continue with this charade during my granddaughter's wedding." "Mrs. Thompson," the priest replied calmly, "I am legally obligated to fulfill Mr. Thompson's final request. And I have not yet finished reading." He cleared his throat and continued. "If Margaret Williams is not present at this ceremony as an honored guest, it is my wish that this wedding be postponed until my family has had time to examine their consciences and make amends for their cruelty toward the woman I love." The gasps from the wedding guests were audible even from my hiding place. Someone in the crowd shouted, "Where is Margaret Williams?" Another voice called out, "Is she here?" I realized this was my moment. Richard had given me the gift of vindication, but it was up to me to claim it. I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and began walking toward the ceremony. As I emerged from the trees and approached the gathering, I could see heads turning, people pointing, conversations erupting throughout the crowd. The Thompson family members in the front rows looked like they were about to faint. Eleanor was frantically whispering to Marcus, who was pulling out his phone, probably calling their lawyer. Patricia had her head in her hands, realizing that their plan to humiliate me had backfired spectacularly. But the person I was most focused on was Jessica. She was standing at the altar in her beautiful white dress, her face pale with shock and confusion. Our eyes met across the crowded ceremony space, and I could see tears streaming down her cheeks. "Margaret," someone in the crowd called out. "There she is." As I walked down the aisle, not as an intruder or an outsider, but as the rightful heir to the Thompson family fortune and the woman Richard had chosen to honor above all others, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: dignity. Father Mackenzie smiled as I approached. "Ms. Williams," he said warmly, "Mr. Thompson wanted me to give you this." He handed me an envelope with my name written in Richard's familiar handwriting. With trembling fingers, I opened the envelope and found a letter dated just 1 week before Richard's death. "My dearest Margaret," it began, "if you are reading this, it means my family has behaved exactly as I feared they would after my death. I am so sorry for the pain they have caused you, but I hope this moment of truth will bring you some measure of justice and peace. You have been the love of my life and the best mother Jessica could have asked for. Everything I am leaving you, you have earned 1,000 times over. Use it wisely, use it kindly, but never doubt that you deserve every bit of happiness it can bring you. All my love, always, Richard." I looked up from the letter to find the entire wedding party and all the guests staring at me in complete silence. Jessica had stepped away from the altar and was walking toward me, her wedding dress trailing behind her on the grass. "Margaret," she whispered when she reached me, "I'm so sorry. I didn't know they were going to. I thought maybe it would be easier if..." "Easier for whom?" I asked quietly, so only she could hear. "I don't know," she admitted, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. I was scared and confused, and everyone was telling me different things about what Dad would have wanted. "I should have stood up for you. I should have protected you the way you always protected me." Looking at her standing there in her wedding dress, crying and vulnerable, and finally seeing clearly what her family had done, I felt my anger beginning to transform into something else. This was still the little girl I'd raised, the young woman I'd loved and supported through every challenge of her life. She'd made a terrible mistake, but she was also a victim of her family's manipulation and prejudice. "We'll talk about this later," I told her gently. "Right now, you have a wedding to finish." "I don't know if I can," she whispered. "Everything feels wrong now. I feel like I've betrayed you and dishonored Dad's memory." I looked around at the crowd of wedding guests, all watching this family drama unfold on what was supposed to be a day of celebration. I looked at Michael, Jessica's fiancé, standing awkwardly at the altar, clearly not knowing what to do. I looked at the Thompson family members, huddled together like conspirators who'd just been exposed. And I realized that I had a choice to make. I could use this moment to punish them all, to let Jessica's wedding be ruined as payback for the humiliation they'd put me through. Or I could choose to be the bigger person, to show them what real grace and dignity looked like. "Father Mackenzie," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Please continue with the ceremony." "I'll take my seat now." "Margaret, wait," Eleanor Thompson called out, hurrying toward me with Marcus close behind. "We need to talk about what we've just learned. Clearly there are legal matters that need to be discussed." I turned to face her, and for the first time in 15 years, I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before: fear. She was afraid of me now, afraid of what I might do with the power Richard had given me. "Eleanor," I said calmly, "you're absolutely right that we need to talk. But not today. Today is Jessica's wedding day, and nothing, not your cruelty, not your greed, not even your panic about your suddenly uncertain financial future, is going to ruin that for her." I walked to an empty seat in the middle section, deliberately not choosing the front row where the immediate family traditionally sat, but also not hiding in the back like an unwelcome guest. As I sat down, I could hear whispers and murmurs throughout the crowd, but I kept my eyes focused straight ahead on Jessica and Michael. Father Mackenzie cleared his throat and resumed the ceremony. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness the union of Jessica Thompson and Michael Patterson in holy matrimony." As the ceremony continued, I found myself thinking about what Richard had done. He'd known that his death would unleash his family's worst instincts toward me, and he'd planned accordingly. But more than that, he'd understood that the only way to truly protect me was to give me power, not just financial security, but real, concrete power over the family business and assets. The Thompson family had spent 15 years treating me like an outsider, constantly reminding me that I didn't really belong, that I had no real claim on Richard or Jessica's love. But Richard had seen through their prejudice and cruelty, and he'd made sure the whole world would know exactly how much I meant to him. When Father Mackenzie pronounced Jessica and Michael husband and wife, the crowd erupted in applause. Jessica looked radiant as she kissed her new husband, but I could see her scanning the crowd until her eyes found mine. When our gazes met, she smiled, a real, genuine smile that reminded me of the little girl who used to crawl into my lap when she was scared or sad. During the reception, I found myself in the surreal position of being both the most important person at the event and the most avoided. Other guests approached me cautiously, offering congratulations and condolences, clearly uncertain about how to navigate this dramatic shift in family dynamics. Some of them seemed genuinely happy to see me vindicated, while others appeared to be calculating how this change might affect their own relationships with the Thompson family. Richard's business associates were particularly interested in talking to me. Several of them made a point of introducing themselves and expressing their eagerness to continue working with Thompson Industries under my leadership. I realized that not only had Richard given me his fortune, but he'd also given me control of a multi-million-dollar company that employed dozens of people. The responsibility was overwhelming, but also strangely empowering. For 15 years, I'd been treated like someone who was lucky to be tolerated by the Thompson family. Now, suddenly, I was the one with the power to make decisions about their futures. Eleanor, Marcus, and Patricia kept their distance during the cocktail hour, huddled together at a corner table, clearly strategizing their next moves. I could imagine the conversations they were having, consulting with lawyers, discussing grounds for contesting the will, trying to figure out how to regain control of the family fortune. But Jessica surprised me. Despite the awkwardness of the situation, she made a point of including me in the family photos, introducing me to Michael's relatives as the woman who raised me, and ensuring that I was treated with the respect that had been denied to me for so long. During the father-daughter dance, which became a poignant memorial moment since Richard wasn't there to dance with his daughter, Jessica asked the DJ to play "What a Wonderful World," the song Richard used to sing to her when she was little. As she danced alone in the center of the dance floor, tears streaming down her face, she looked directly at me and mouthed, "Thank you for everything." Later that evening, as the reception was winding down, Jessica approached me at my table. "Margaret," she said, "can we talk privately?" We walked to a quiet corner of the garden, away from the other guests and the cleanup crews. "I owe you the biggest apology of my life," she began, "and I don't even know where to start." "Start with the truth," I said simply. "The truth is that I was a coward," she admitted. "After Dad died, his family started filling my head with all kinds of doubts and fears. They told me you were probably going to contest the will, that you might try to take money that should rightfully go to me. They said you'd been manipulating Dad during his illness, taking advantage of his confusion to secure your future. And you believed them? I didn't want to believe them, she said, but I was grieving and scared and confused. Dad's death hit me so hard, and suddenly everyone was telling me different things about what he would have wanted. His family made it seem like protecting their interests was the same thing as protecting his legacy. So you decided it would be easier to just exclude me entirely? I thought maybe if we kept the wedding small and family-focused, we could avoid any potential conflicts, she said miserably. I thought maybe you'd understand that it wasn't personal, that it was just about keeping things simple during a difficult time. Jessica, I said gently, when has love ever been simple? When has family ever been simple? Your father and I chose to build a complicated, imperfect, beautiful family together despite all the obstacles his relatives put in our way. We chose love over simplicity every single time. I know, she whispered. I know, and I failed you. I failed Dad. I let them convince me to betray the woman who taught me how to be strong, how to stand up for what's right, how to love unconditionally. I looked at this young woman, my daughter in every way that mattered, and I felt my heart breaking for her pain and my anger dissolving into compassion. Jessica, I said, you made a mistake. A terrible, hurtful mistake that I will never forget. But you're also 27 years old, you just lost your father, and you were being manipulated by people who should have known better. I'm not going to pretend that what happened today didn't hurt me deeply, but I'm also not going to let it destroy the relationship we've built over the past 20 years. Really? She asked, hope creeping into her voice. Really? But things are going to be different now. I'm not going to be the accommodating, patient woman who accepts disrespect and mistreatment from your father's family. Your father gave me power for a reason, and I intend to use it. What are you going to do? I looked back toward the reception, where I could see Eleanor, Marcus, and Patricia still huddled together, probably plotting their legal strategy. I'm going to do what your father would have wanted, I said. I'm going to take care of you, and I'm going to make sure his business and his legacy are protected. But I'm also going to make sure that the people who treated me like garbage for 15 years face some consequences for their actions. Over the next few weeks, as the reality of Richard's will sank in, the Thompson family's true nature became even clearer. Instead of apologizing for their behavior at the wedding, they hired a team of lawyers to contest the will. They claimed that Richard had been mentally incompetent when he'd made his final changes, that I had unduly influenced him, that his decision to leave me the bulk of his estate was evidence of my manipulation rather than his love. They dragged our private life through the courts, questioning every gift Richard had ever given me, every vacation we'd taken together, every decision I'd made regarding his medical care. They painted me as a calculating gold digger who had spent 15 years manipulating a vulnerable widower and his impressionable daughter. But Richard had been smart. He'd anticipated their reaction, and he'd made sure his will was ironclad. He'd undergone psychological evaluations to prove his mental competency. He'd documented his reasons for his decisions in detailed letters to his attorney. He'd created a paper trail that made it impossible to claim he'd been coerced or confused. More importantly, he'd chosen his moment of revelation perfectly. By having his will read at Jessica's wedding, in front of dozens of witnesses, he'd made it impossible for his family to hide their cruel treatment of me. Everyone who'd been at that ceremony had seen them try to exclude me, and everyone had heard Richard's posthumous condemnation of their behavior. The court battle lasted 6 months, during which time I continued living in the house that was now legally mine, running the business that Richard had entrusted to me, and slowly beginning to understand the full scope of the life he'd made possible for me. Thompson Industries was even more successful than I'd realized. Richard had been conservative in his lifestyle, preferring to reinvest profits back into the company rather than spending lavishly on luxury items. The business was debt-free, profitable, and positioned for continued growth. I found myself not just wealthy, but responsible for the livelihoods of 63 employees and their families. It was overwhelming at first. I'd spent my career as a nurse, taking care of individual patients. Suddenly I was responsible for strategic decisions, board meetings, contract negotiations, and all the complexities of running a multi-million-dollar operation. But I discovered that many of the skills that had made me a good nurse, attention to detail, the ability to stay calm under pressure, genuine care for people's well-being, also made me effective in business. And Richard had surrounded himself with competent, loyal managers who were eager to help me succeed. During those 6 months of legal proceedings, Jessica and I slowly began rebuilding our relationship. She testified on my behalf during the court hearings, describing in detail how I'd raised her and cared for her father. She publicly rejected her extended family's attempts to turn her against me, and she made it clear that she supported Richard's decision to entrust me with his legacy. It wasn't easy. We had to work through years of accumulated hurt, misunderstanding, and manipulation. Jessica had to confront the racism and classism that had shaped her family's treatment of me, and I had to learn to trust her again after feeling so betrayed by her silence during my humiliation at the wedding. But love, real, deep, chosen love, proved stronger than all the obstacles. We started having weekly dinners together, just the two of us, talking about everything we'd been through and everything we hoped for in the future. She told me about the pressure she'd felt from her father's family, the guilt she'd carried about her mother's death, the confusion she'd experienced about where she belonged in a world that had always made her feel caught between two different versions of family loyalty. And I told her about the loneliness I'd endured for 15 years, always feeling like I was walking on eggshells, always knowing that Richard's family saw me as a temporary inconvenience rather than a permanent part of their lives. I explained how their rejection had made me question my own worth, my own place in the world, my own right to the love and respect I'd thought I'd earned. When the court finally ruled in my favor, upholding Richard's will in its entirety, I felt a mixture of vindication and sadness. I'd won, but the victory came at the cost of any remaining relationship with Eleanor, Marcus, and Patricia. They'd spent 6 months dragging my name through the mud, questioning my integrity, and trying to paint me as a villain in the story of their family. Even though I'd been legally vindicated, the damage to our relationships was irreparable. But Jessica surprised me again. On the day the court ruling was announced, she showed up at my house with a bottle of champagne and a letter she'd written to her father's family, formally cutting ties with them until they were willing to apologize for their treatment of me. "Dad left you everything because he knew you'd use it wisely," she told me as we sat in the living room where Richard and I had spent so many quiet evenings together. "But more than that, he left you everything because he wanted to make sure you knew, and everyone else knew, exactly how much you meant to him. You weren't just his girlfriend or his caregiver or his daughter's stepmother. You were his partner, his equal, his chosen family. And now you're mine too." That conversation marked the real beginning of our healing. We stopped tiptoeing around each other's feelings and started being honest about what we needed to move forward. Jessica acknowledged that she'd been complicit in her family's mistreatment of me, and I acknowledged that I'd sometimes enabled their behavior by accepting it rather than demanding better treatment. We also started talking about Richard, really talking about him, sharing our favorite memories, our regrets, our gratitude for the time we'd all had together. Jessica told me stories about her early memories of her mother that Richard had never shared with me. I told her about the private moments Richard and I had shared, the dreams he'd had for our future, the pride he'd felt watching her grow into the woman she'd become. Through these conversations, I began to understand something important about Richard's final gift to me. Yes, he'd left me financially secure, and yes, he'd given me the power to control his family's access to their inheritance. But more importantly, he'd given me the freedom to finally be myself without fear. For 15 years, I'd moderated my opinions, softened my reactions, and accommodated behavior that I would never have accepted from anyone else, all because I was afraid that if I pushed back too hard, I'd lose my place in Richard and Jessica's lives. I'd made myself smaller, quieter, more agreeable than I naturally was, thinking that was the price I had to pay for love and acceptance. But Richard's will had changed everything. I no longer had to worry about being cast out of the family, because I now controlled the family's resources. I no longer had to accept disrespect from Eleanor, Marcus, and Patricia, because they now needed my approval for access to trust funds, business decisions, and property inheritance. Most importantly, I no longer had to question whether I'd truly belonged in Richard's life, because he'd made his feelings unmistakably clear to the entire world. With this newfound freedom, I began making changes that I'd been dreaming about for years. First, I modernized Thompson Industries' employment practices, implementing mentorship programs for young professionals, expanding healthcare benefits, and creating advancement opportunities for women and minorities who had been overlooked by the company's previous leadership structure. I also used my position to support causes that mattered to me. I established a scholarship fund for nursing students from underprivileged backgrounds. I made significant donations to organizations that provided support for blended families and step-parents. I funded a community center in the neighborhood where I'd grown up, creating programs for single mothers and children who needed after-school care. But perhaps most satisfying of all, I used my power to teach Eleanor, Marcus, and Patricia some much-needed lessons about respect and consequences. The first lesson came when Marcus approached me about maintaining his position on the board of Thompson Industries. Richard had included a clause in his will stating that family members could retain their board positions only with my explicit approval, and Marcus had assumed that despite our legal battle, I would continue the family business as usual. He was wrong. Marcus, I told him during our meeting in the conference room where he'd once questioned my qualifications to have opinions about Richard's medical care, I've given a lot of thought to the future leadership structure of this company. And I've decided that what Thompson Industries needs is fresh perspective, new energy, and board members who understand the value of treating all people with dignity and respect. What are you saying? He asked, though I could see in his eyes that he already knew. I'm saying that your position on this board is terminated, effective immediately. I'll be replacing you with someone who has both the business acumen and the personal character that this company deserves. You can't do this, he sputtered. I've been on this board for 12 years. Richard would never have wanted. Marcus, I interrupted, Richard left me in control of this company precisely because he knew I would make decisions based on what's best for the business and the employees, not what's most comfortable for family members who've proven they can't be trusted to treat people fairly. The second lesson came when Patricia requested access to the trust fund Richard had established for his grandchildren's education. Patricia's daughter was starting college, and she needed the money to pay tuition costs that she'd been counting on for years. Patricia, I said when she called to request the fund disbursement, I'd be happy to discuss releasing those education funds. But first, I think we need to have a conversation about the kind of values we want to teach the next generation of this family. What do you mean? She asked warily. I mean that your daughter is about to start her adult life, and she's going to encounter people from all different backgrounds, cultures, and family situations. I want to make sure she understands the importance of treating everyone with kindness and respect, regardless of whether they look like her or come from the same social class. Of course she understands that, Patricia said quickly. I'm not convinced she does, I replied. After all, she watched her mother and her extended family spend 6 months in court, trying to prove that a black woman who devoted 15 years to caring for their family was actually a manipulative gold digger. What kind of lesson do you think that taught her about judging people based on their race or their relationship to wealth and power? The silence on the other end of the phone was telling. Here's what I propose, I continued. Your daughter can have access to her education fund, but I'd like her to spend her winter break volunteering at the community center I've established. I want her to meet some of the families who benefit from our programs, to understand what real struggle looks like, and to learn the value of service to others. If she completes that volunteer commitment and writes me a thoughtful reflection on what she's learned, I'll happily continue funding her education. You're using my daughter's education as leverage to make some kind of political point, Patricia accused. I'm using your daughter's education as an opportunity to teach her the kind of values her grandfather would have wanted her to learn, I corrected. Values like compassion, humility, and respect for all people, regardless of their circumstances. If you think those are political points rather than basic human decency, then maybe we have a bigger problem than I realized. The third and most important lesson came when Eleanor, desperate to maintain her social position and access to family resources, finally swallowed her pride and asked to meet with me privately. We met at the house that had been her son's home and was now mine, a fact that she was clearly struggling to accept as she sat in the living room where she'd spent countless holidays making subtle digs about my background and my relationship with Richard. Margaret, she began, her voice strained with the effort of being polite to someone she'd spent years despising, I think it's time we put this unpleasantness behind us and tried to move forward as a family. Unpleasantness? I repeated. Eleanor, is that really how you're characterizing what you and your children put me through? 6 months of legal proceedings where you questioned my integrity, my motives, and my right to be considered part of this family? An attempt to invalidate the final wishes of your own son because you couldn't accept that he'd chosen to honor the woman who'd cared for him and raised his daughter? We were protecting Jessica's interests, she said defensively. We were trying to make sure Richard's assets went to his blood relatives, as any reasonable person would expect. Eleanor, I said, looking directly into her eyes, let me ask you something. In all the years I was with Richard, did you ever, even once, see me pressure him for money? Did you ever see me ask for expensive gifts, or push him to change his will, or show any sign that I was motivated by his wealth rather than my love for him and Jessica? She was quiet for a long moment. No, she finally admitted. Did you ever see me neglect his care when he was sick? Did you ever see me put my own interests ahead of his well-being or Jessica's needs? No. Did you ever see me treat Jessica with anything less than complete devotion and maternal love? No. Then what, exactly, made you think I was a gold digger who had manipulated your son? What evidence did you have for that belief, other than the color of my skin and your assumption that a black woman couldn't possibly be worthy of a wealthy white man's love? The question hung in the air between us like a challenge. Eleanor's face flushed red, but she couldn't seem to find words to respond. That's what I thought, I said quietly. Your objections to me were never about protecting Richard or Jessica or preserving family values. They were about racism and classism and your inability to accept that your son had chosen to love someone you considered beneath your family's social status. That's not. She began, then stopped. Eleanor, I continued, for 15 years, I accepted your coldness and your subtle insults and your constant efforts to make me feel like an outsider in my own home. I told myself that you were just protecting your family, that you needed time to get used to me, that eventually you'd see that I genuinely loved Richard and Jessica and had no ulterior motives. I stood up and walked to the mantelpiece, where a photo of Richard, Jessica, and me sat next to pictures of Jessica's biological mother. But now I understand that no amount of time or proof would have ever been enough for you. You weren't waiting for evidence that I was worthy of your acceptance. You had already decided that I never could be, based on nothing more than your prejudices and assumptions. I turned back to face her. So no, Eleanor, we are not going to put this unpleasantness behind us and pretend to be one big happy family. We are going to acknowledge what really happened here. You are going to admit that you treated me with cruelty and disrespect for 15 years, not because of anything I did wrong, but because of who you assumed I was based on my race and my background. She started, then stopped again. And then, I continued, you are going to apologize. Not a half-hearted, self-serving apology designed to get back into my good graces so you can maintain access to family money. A real, honest, meaningful apology that acknowledges the pain you caused and the damage you did to relationships that should have been built on love and mutual respect. Eleanor sat in silence for several minutes, clearly struggling with the choice between her pride and her practical need to repair our relationship. You're right, she finally whispered. I treated you terribly, and it wasn't because of anything you did. It was because I couldn't accept that Richard had chosen someone so different from our family's expectations. Different how? I pressed, wanting her to say it explicitly. Different, racially. Socially. I thought you came from a different world, and I was afraid that meant you couldn't really understand or appreciate our family's values and traditions. And what I actually came from, I said, was a family that taught me the value of hard work, compassion, service to others, and unconditional love. Values that turned out to be exactly what Richard and Jessica needed in their lives. Yes, she said, tears beginning to form in her eyes. Margaret, I am so sorry. I am sorry for the way I treated you, for the assumptions I made about your motivations, for the pain I caused you and Richard and Jessica. I am sorry for trying to exclude you from the wedding, and I am sorry for the legal battle that followed. You didn't deserve any of it. It was the apology I'd been waiting 15 years to hear, and it felt both satisfying and sad. Satisfying because it represented a long overdue acknowledgement of wrongs that had been done to me. Sad because it had taken Richard's death and the threat of financial consequences to finally motivate this moment of honesty. Thank you, I said simply. That means more to me than you probably realize. Is there any way we can rebuild some kind of relationship? She asked hopefully. I considered the question carefully. Eleanor was Jessica's grandmother, and she would always be part of Jessica's life in some capacity. For Jessica's sake, it would be better if we could find a way to coexist peacefully. Eleanor, I said, I'm willing to work toward rebuilding a relationship with you, but it's going to have to be a different kind of relationship than what we had before. I'm not going to go back to accepting subtle disrespect and condescension in the name of keeping peace. I'm not going to pretend that what happened between us wasn't serious, or that trust can be automatically restored just because you've apologized. I understand, she said. If you're willing to treat me with genuine respect, not just politeness motivated by financial concerns, but actual respect for who I am and what I've contributed to this family, then we can work toward rebuilding some kind of relationship. But it's going to take time, and it's going to require consistent actions, not just words. Over the following months, Eleanor, Marcus, and Patricia all made varying degrees of effort to repair their relationships with me. Eleanor seemed genuinely committed to changing her behavior, attending family events where she made real efforts to include me in conversations and acknowledge my role in Jessica's life. Marcus remained somewhat distant but civil, clearly still resentful about losing his board position but smart enough to recognize that antagonizing me further would only make things worse for him. Patricia was the most resistant to change. She fulfilled the volunteer requirement I'd set for her daughter's education fund, but she did so with obvious reluctance and barely concealed anger. She seemed to view my conditions as punishment rather than opportunities for growth, and her interactions with me remained strained and artificial. But the most important relationship, the one between Jessica and me, continued to strengthen and deepen. We started new traditions together, like taking annual trips to places Richard had always wanted to visit. We began working together on the charitable foundations I'd established, with Jessica using her legal expertise to help structure programs and policies. Most meaningfully, Jessica started calling me Mom again, something she'd stopped doing in the months after Richard's death, when her extended family had been filling her head with doubts about my place in their lives. The first time she said it, we were having dinner at a restaurant near Thompson Industries, discussing plans for expanding our scholarship program. Mom, she said casually, as if she'd never stopped using the title, what do you think about adding a mentorship component to the scholarship program? I felt tears spring to my eyes immediately. Jessica, I said, did you just call me Mom? She looked surprised. Of course I did. That's what you are. But you stopped calling me that after your father died, I said softly. I know, she said, reaching across the table to take my hand. I was confused and hurt, and I let other people's opinions make me question what I knew in my heart. But you are my mom, Margaret. You're the woman who raised me, who taught me how to be strong, who showed me what unconditional love looks like. Dad's will didn't make you my mother. You became my mother 15 years ago when you chose to love a broken little girl who desperately needed someone to believe in her. That conversation happened 2 years after the wedding, and it marked the moment when I finally felt like I'd truly reclaimed my place in Jessica's life and heart. Around the same time, I started dating again, something I'd thought I'd never be ready for after losing Richard. His name was David Martinez, and he was a professor at the local university where I'd started taking some business classes to better understand my new role running Thompson Industries. David was different from Richard in almost every way. He was younger than me by 3 years, he came from a working-class Latino family, and he had no interest in wealth or social status. He was attracted to my intelligence, my strength, and my commitment to using my resources to help others. He'd never heard of Thompson Industries or the Thompson family when we met, which meant he was interested in Margaret Williams, not Margaret Williams the heiress. When I introduced David to Jessica, I was nervous about how she'd react to seeing me with someone other than her father. But Jessica surprised me again by embracing David warmly and expressing genuine happiness about my decision to open my heart to love again. Dad would want you to be happy, she told me after our first dinner together as a group. He wouldn't want you to spend the rest of your life alone, mourning him. He'd want you to find love and joy and partnership again. David and I took our relationship slowly, both of us aware that we were navigating complex emotional territory. But gradually, we built something beautiful together, a partnership based on shared values, mutual respect, and genuine affection for each other's dreams and goals. 3 years after Richard's death, David and I got married in a small ceremony at the community center I'd established. Jessica walked me down the aisle, and in her speech at the reception, she said something that brought tears to everyone's eyes. Margaret taught me that family isn't about biology or legal documents or social expectations. Family is about showing up for each other, day after day, year after year, through all of life's challenges and celebrations. Margaret showed up for me when I was 7 years old and needed a mother. She showed up for my father when he was sick and needed a caregiver. She showed up for our entire family when we needed someone strong enough to hold us together through loss and change and conflict. Today, David is promising to show up for Margaret the way she's always shown up for everyone she loves. And I couldn't be happier to officially welcome him into our family, our chosen family, our love-based family, our family that's built on respect and commitment and genuine care for each other's well-being. As I listened to Jessica speak, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. 5 years earlier, I'd been humiliated and rejected at what should have been one of the happiest days of my life. I'd been treated like an unwelcome intruder in the family I'd devoted myself to for 15 years. But that humiliation had led to vindication. That rejection had led to recognition. That moment of powerlessness had led to a position of real influence and authority that I was using to make positive changes in the world. Most importantly, that day of betrayal had ultimately led to deeper, more honest relationships built on genuine respect rather than obligation or social expectations. Now, as I stood at my own wedding reception, surrounded by people who loved and appreciated me for exactly who I was, I realized that Richard's final gift to me hadn't just been financial security or social vindication. His real gift had been the freedom to finally become fully myself, to stop apologizing for my presence, stop accepting less than I deserved, and start using my voice and my power to create the kind of world I wanted to live in. Looking back on that terrible day when I was kicked out of Jessica's wedding, I can honestly say that it was one of the most important moments of my life. Not because the humiliation was pleasant or because the betrayal didn't hurt, but because it forced me to confront some hard truths about the relationships I'd been accepting and the person I'd been allowing myself to be. If you've ever found yourself in a situation where you're being mistreated by people who should love and respect you, I want you to know that you don't have to accept that treatment. You don't have to make yourself smaller or quieter or more accommodating to earn love that should be freely given. You don't have to tolerate disrespect from people who benefit from your kindness and generosity. Sometimes the people who claim to be your family are actually the ones holding you back from becoming your fullest, most authentic self. Sometimes the relationships you're fighting hardest to preserve are the ones that are causing you the most damage. And sometimes, the moment when everything falls apart is actually the moment when everything finally comes together. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear about your own experiences with family dynamics, chosen families, or moments when you had to stand up for your own worth and dignity. Please share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories about resilience, justice, and the power of refusing to accept less than you deserve. Because here's what I've learned after 57 years of life. You are worthy of love that doesn't require you to diminish yourself. You are worthy of respect that doesn't come with conditions. You are worthy of relationships that celebrate who you are rather than trying to change you into someone else. And if the people in your life can't see your worth, sometimes the best thing you can do is trust that the universe has better plans for you than you could ever imagine for yourself. My name is Margaret Martinez now, and I'm living proof that your greatest humiliation can become your most powerful transformation. Sometimes you have to lose the family you were born into or married into to find the family you were meant to have all along. Sometimes you have to be kicked out of one celebration to find your way to a much better party. And sometimes, just sometimes, the person who seems to hold all the power is actually the one who's about to lose everything, while the person who appears to have lost everything is about to gain more than they ever dreamed possible. The truth always comes out eventually. Justice always finds a way. And love, real love, the kind that builds you up instead of tearing you down, always wins in the end. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for believing that I deserved better than what I was getting. And thank you for understanding that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to accept unloving treatment from the people who should know better. If you're in your own situation where you're being undervalued or mistreated, I hope my story gives you the courage to demand better. You deserve to be celebrated, not tolerated. You deserve to be honored, not humiliated. You deserve to be included, not excluded. And if the people in your life can't give you those things, then maybe it's time to find people who can. Remember, you are enough, exactly as you are. You are worthy, exactly as you are. And you deserve love that recognizes your worth without requiring you to prove it over and over again. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. Not even family. Especially not family.